all need to know, that we need to understand, and we need to really take, take note of, is actually whatever that's happening within our community when it comes to toxicity.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a jumbling words over there, because why it actually is very, very hard right now for people to lead their lives when there's a lot of toxics around them, especially when it comes from their loved ones or the people around them. And it is very, very scary to think that it could actually affect their mental health as well. Nabil, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, if you have been in the news, you would know that Amber Heard and also Johnny Depp, going through a case. Abuse has been mentioned, and we kind of know who the perpetrator is, but I mean, obviously we can't know for sure until the trial ends.
Of course.
But it does look like the female side of the relationship is at fault here, and that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about toxicity, but more specifically, we want to talk about toxicity among women, a toxic femininity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
That's another word that we keep on jumbling up, because why, to be fair, at the end of the day, it's not just the men who gives out all the toxic thinking and toxic words. Sometimes it does come from the women as well. And to discuss this further, we have in the studio together with us somebody who's from the Specialist Center, KHAIRUL ARIF RAZALI, a psychology officer. Assalamualaikum. Good morning, KHAIRUL.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and Nabil.
Selamat Hari Raya, first of all.
For having me here. Selamat Hari Raya to both of you.
Okay, just to jump into today's topic, let us give you the opportunity to define what does it actually mean by toxic femininity in your own terms.
Yep. So first and foremost, when it comes to toxic femininity, it has different interpretations and meaning if we are looking from different sort of lenses. But it can be easily understandable in terms of how toxic femininity includes thoughts, behaviors, or emotions that benefit or deter others, usually the opposite gender, males, to the deterrent of the woman's independence, emotions, and like what you mentioned just now, their mental health and overall well-being. So that is what essentially toxic femininity is. And when it comes to the core components or the key features of toxic femininity, there are three key areas. Number one is in terms of docile, which means that women needs to be subservient, needs to follow or conform to the instructions of the other parties. That's what essentially docile is. Number two is in terms of policing femininity in others. For example, maybe we might have heard comments from females to other females, whereby there might be a decision of not having children. And then they will question, why do you not want to have children? That is the kind of policing femininity in others.
Okay.
And thirdly, it's about how women can actually use this femininity as sort of a weapon to actually use their perceived vulnerabilities or weakness to be able to exploit or take control of that particular situation.
Yeah, it's not like the women don't really have that many weapons. They already have a lot already, but yeah, I mean, quoting KHAIRUL actually. Before we go on to Nabil, but I just want to ask you one more thing, KHAIRUL. When it comes to toxicity, in regards of whether it's masculine or feminine, whether it comes from the men or from the women, normally you would hear outside that, you know, man causes toxic thinking, men do this, men do that. It is also very clear that right now, in this current day and age, that women also contribute to such mindset as well. That hampers the thinking of men out there as well.
Absolutely. So that is why toxic is the key term before whether it's femininity or masculinity, which refers to males. It's really important to really understand what toxic means, and it's more or less based on our interpretations, or what we can see is through behaviors. How women, we are talking about toxic femininity, displays the behaviors or actions to be able to go to a certain degree that they can actually manipulate or take control that situation to their own advantage, rather than actually thinking on a broader spectrum to look at how both parties can actually benefit from this situation.
Okay.
So, I mean, looking at the current news, I mean, reflecting on the case of Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, we kind of get an idea that possibly toxic femininity is one of the faults here. Maybe you can talk about how can toxic femininity disrupt relationships, like how we see has been exhibited between Johnny Depp and also Amber Heard.
Allegedly.
Yeah. So first and foremost, when it comes to relationship, as we can all imagine, it will include a lot of factors to actually enhance or even strengthen a relationship. So for example, trust, communication, and collaboration. In terms of these two parties, males and females, to be able to sustain a strong relationship. However, when it comes to toxic femininity, it's about women using their perceived vulnerabilities and sort of their weaknesses to be able to appeal to the man's sort of nature, like a damsel in distress. You know, how men naturally would want to be able to protect or would want to be able to alleviate the concerns that women have at the time. So knowing that, then when engaging in toxic femininity, women will actually exploit that and then maybe take control that particular situation.
So this problem actually falls onto the culture itself and how we perceive the world works before. Like you said, I mean, when you want to quote fairy tales on how, the prince will be charging on a horse, saving a damsel in distress, it has been put onto us for years and years that men is and has to be always superior and the strong one and the independent one, whereas the women is always the one who's like, I'm in need, I'm in trouble, I need your help. That contributes to all of that thinking as well.
That's right. So that's where the hierarchy or the power we have since, the conception of time possibly, about how that hierarchy and power will be in accordance to the gender. Males, they are perceived as strong or tough or to be in charge in terms of the hierarchy, need to be in the higher level. Women, on the other hand, needs to be, subservient or needs to conform to the males and need to stick in the hierarchy that they have. So, hierarchy and power, I would say those are the two important factors when we are talking about how this would affect relationships.
When we want to talk about individuals, sometimes of course, it's great for us to celebrate our own individuality, right?
Yes.
I mean, we want to celebrate ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm a man, for example. I'm proud of being a
For example.
For example, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I am a man, what am I saying?
Yes, all right.
But when we want to talk about being feminine, of course, it's a grand thing. I mean, if you want to be feminine, it's up to you. But at what point does it become toxic? Can femininity actually become toxic? I mean, we're obviously talking about what
That's right. So feminine in itself, it has different interpretations for different women, because feminine is something that we can associate with women. So, for example, if a woman A, let's categorize it that way, wants to put on makeup to actually say that I am being feminine, but woman B doesn't seem to be putting it as an important indicator in terms of being feminine to be putting on makeup. So when it comes to toxic and when it comes to feminine in itself, it's about what extent do we go through in terms of the features or the traits that we have in terms of femininity to be able to go and exploit or manipulate that situation. And then that is how I would say that feminine becomes toxic.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the world nowadays, again, just to clarify to all of our audiences out there, is that even though we have three men talking about this topic, we are in no way, in shape or form, banging on the drums of men should be superior, men should be powerful. We want to be fair. We want to be really understanding of how the situation is. And as time goes on, women have been given opportunities, as they should, to be in power, holding higher positions in the hierarchy, as you mentioned. CEOs, we got ministers, we got even family earners at that point. We have husbands who become house husbands, if I may say so. How does that whole mechanic work, or how can it work in an ideal world to make sure that the whole, at least marriage constitution works at its best when it comes to, leveling everything out?
Yep. So, when it comes to equality, I believe we are referring to this equality in terms of the power, the hierarchy in these two different genders, because as what we have discussed earlier, in terms of what is currently being said with regards to the hierarchy and power, it's about still the perception is that males will be in the higher ups of the hierarchy and power. But like what you have mentioned, nowadays we have women in the higher sort of positions, which is a great thing to see. And I would say that we are on course towards, equaling these rights, these sort of perks or benefits that we have. But it's still a long way, I would say, and it's very important for us to bear in mind to what point our intention to make this equal, that we don't engage in toxic femininity.
All right. Okay.
I wonder, Mr. KHAIRUL, because you are a psychology officer, obviously maybe you have come across this kind of cases in your work. Maybe you can illustrate to us an example of how toxic femininity disrupt a relationship. Have you ever been, have you ever come across patients of those kinds?
So in terms of toxic femininity itself, that would be one of the features that the client or patients who I have seen might sort of depict that would affect one of their areas of life, which is relationships, right? So when it comes to this particular toxic femininity, if they do actually engage in this particular behavior, and it is one of the things that they actually realize, I actually have been exploiting my femininity to my advantage, then it will be something that we can try to unpack. So what are the behaviors? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to toxic femininity or toxic masculinity, it's about the behaviors. Irrespective of the genders, it's about what they do because of their genders that they actually exploit or manipulate that situation. So identifying those behaviors and then trying to actually help them in an effective manner through psychotherapies, for example, which is one of the things that I provide to my patients. That is how we can actually address this particular topic.
Okay, let me get this straight, because when we talk about toxic femininity or even toxicity for that matter, it doesn't always go down the violence route. As you mentioned, I mean, like, you can literally become toxic in your relationship should you play that damsel in distress card. You can be the, I'm helpless, I can't do anything. That is also a form of toxicity. You're taking an advantage, as you said, in your relationship, right?
That's right.
So it's not always shouting and throwing stuff at you. It could be the manja kind, if I may say so, but still get away with stuff. That's
right, absolutely. So aggression and violence is just one of the ways that, in this case, women can display this toxic femininity. There are a lot of ways that they can, utilize their perceived weaknesses to be able to take advantage or manipulate that situation.
All right, interesting.
When we come across, I mean, for example, if we come across people who are females who have toxic femininity, like, how do you break it to them? Because sometimes we cannot help it, because sometimes people are just born with a certain ideology. Like, macam, I've met a few old pakcik-makcik, old uncles, aunties who are inherently racist. So, unfortunately, they are just born like that and they are not educated well and they didn't know that it's a harmful thing. But like, macam, how do you break it to someone who has toxic femininity? Like, how do you go about it?
Yeah, definitely. And I also hear on a regular basis in terms of, for example, when little boys cry, boys don't cry, don't cry, boys need to be strong. I mean, then when it comes to dolls, for example, we might see in TV shows with G.I. Joe or with like masculine sort of strong muscles type of dolls, and then if little girls take those dolls and then they will be sort of warned or sort of being reminded by their parents that, play with Barbie, not play. So, it's actually important also to note that, yes, parents do play a role, but when it comes to, educating individuals who might be engaging in toxic femininity, it's important to be able to look at which lenses they are viewing this toxic femininity from. Because if they are coming from the gender sort of inequality point of view, then maybe we can sort of engage in discussion about, what they mean that made them engage in toxic femininity. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are different lenses about how one defines toxic femininity.
Exactly, as you mentioned, different lenses, different perception, different set of mind, because how I see someone having those attributes may be different of what Nabil may witness himself. So, there's no proper guideline to really identify whether someone is being a truly toxic person or they're not, isn't it? It's hard, right?
It is absolutely hard, especially when it's something that you cannot see with your naked eyes, so to speak.
Yeah.
It is something that the persons themselves exhibits through what goes on in their mind, i.e. thoughts, and what goes on in terms of the emotions that they feel, which they then translate into behaviors, which then might be a little too late for us as an outsider to say, oh, maybe this person is actually engaging in toxic femininity. So it's very challenging, absolutely.
Let's say there are those who are at home, who's watching us and actually going over in her own head that macam, maybe I do have toxic femininity myself. Like how do they begin the steps of removing that from their life? What would be your advice?
Yep. So of course I would say one of the things is in terms of self-love, because what I have found just now, Nabil, when you mentioned about, there are some patients who I have been seeing in practice who displays this toxic femininity due to unresolved traumas. They would actually as a consequence to these unresolved traumas, they might actually project certain things that would want to protect them in a way, although they didn't realize that they are actually exploiting or manipulating that situation. So in a way, I would encourage for them to, self-love is in terms of knowing themselves a little bit better, going through their discovery journey, so that then they can try to know, hey, I may have my own weaknesses, and if I do want to address these weaknesses, I can actually seek help. And one of them is to be able to come to, psychological treatments and so on.
Self-love.
I think that's very beautiful, because it's like you're not fighting fire with fire, you're fighting fire with water instead. Because when I asked you that question, in my mind, I thought you would give some generic answers, but actually self-love is very important. And I think it's true that unresolved traumas are the reason why some people who are hurt other people.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately it's like that. All right, we are almost at the end of our segment here, but before we go, we do want to, hear from you lastly, what is your last advice? Again, I mean, like you've given some of them, like maybe your last words to all our fellow audiences about, to diminish or to take away all of this toxicity, regardless whether you're a man or a woman, and also where can people find you should they want to seek professional help from you moving forward? Please, KHAIRUL.
Thank you so much, Mio. Much appreciated. So in terms of the support that they can seek, if they would like to see me, they can attend to Specialist Center, and should they wish to make an appointment, they can kindly contact the hospital, and then they will be able to make the appointment to be able to see me. And also on our website, you are able to look into my profile to get to know me a little bit in terms of my background and so on, and hopefully we'll be able to work together collaboratively as a team to understand and to be able to address your situation. And my last words in terms of addressing, hopefully in our way to diminish or reduce these levels of toxic toxic femininity or toxic masculinity, I sincerely hope that we actually get to be able to understand ourselves better, and in terms of the traits, the personalities. Of course, we have our own nature as men, as women, but then it's important for us to be able to understand ourselves better.
Exactly. Self-love is the message that you want to take away over here. Thank you so much, KHAIRUL ARIF RAZALI, Psychology Officer from the Specialist Center, for coming down and sharing with us your thoughts and your opinions about our topic today, which is the toxic femininity. But one thing's for sure, guys, regardless of whatever gender it is that you are, feminine, masculine, whatever you want to call yourself, you can even call yourself a 3, but toxicity is never the solution. Be kind to one another, be nice to one another. Inshallah, everything is going to be
definitely fine. Self-love and being self-aware are very, very important.